Right, so that's loud. My name is Doug Richard, and I run something called the School for Startups. Over the last 3 years, largely since the beginning of the financial crisis, I've been teaching people how to start businesses. And so over these past 3 years, I've had the opportunity to teach some 12,000 people across Europe how to start a business. And I was asked last summer, as a speech at Oxford, talking to Oxford University students who are very bright, which is just a very nice way of saying really quite obnoxious. And one of them asked me the question, so what's the biggest mistake you've ever made? And I'm always happy to answer pretty much any question anybody ever asks, but I wasn't prepared for that question because I'd never actually thought about what the biggest mistake I had ever made was. And I know you don't know me, but I have 2 personality traits that made it very difficult to satisfactorily answer the question. The first is, I like to be very precise. I'm somebody who likes to quantify things. I'm sort of a geek. And I had never actually determined precisely how big my biggest mistake was. And that discomfited me. The second thing was, is that I'm one of these people who's either in a very, very good mood or not. There's a term for that. And I kind of answered the question on the day, but the next time, a few months later, when I was absolutely not in a good mood, I thought, what a fantastic moment to quantify, finally, the biggest mistake I've ever made. So I actually did it. I took out a spreadsheet and I made a list of all the business mistakes I ever made. I thought if I tried to do all of my life's mistakes, that would be too long. And I then sat there. It was a quite satisfactory process. At the end, I had absolutely quantifiably determined the biggest mistake I had ever made. And of course, I was even more depressed after that, so it was really good all around. And so I thought today, instead of giving a speech about how life is perfect and how easy it is to start a business and how anyone can do it, I thought how much more illustrative it would be and humiliating to me to simply share with you the largest mistake I've ever made. And I have to admit, once I did quantify it, it actually wasn't terribly surprising. I kind of knew it already, but why not, right? In order to describe that, I have to go back to the start of my second company. I was an LA entrepreneur. I started software companies in film and TV. And my second company was a company called Visual Software. And I started it with 2 friends. And our goal was to revolutionize 3D graphics and animation for special effects. This is a long time ago now. This was 1991. So this is pre-Toy Story, as it were. And there were a few special effects houses in LA doing some very interesting work, but we wanted to do something very simple. We wanted to simply rewrite all of the software code and take it off of mini computers and Unix workstations and put it on PCs, thus decimate the cost of it, wipe everybody else out of the business, and own the whole world. At least that was the plan. And so we embarked on this process, and though it's, I'm sure, a very interesting story how we got to where we ended up, we never actually ended up there. We ended up instead becoming a commercial graphics company, creating software for families and homes and businesses, quite inadvertently. So fast forward 5 years, I'm at a trade show called Comdex, which at the time was the biggest trade show outside of CeBIT, certainly the biggest in the US, held in Las Vegas. And we had a nice big booth. Oh, we actually had a middle-sized booth. And this fellow comes shambling into our booth. And he walks up to me and says, hello, my name is Paul, and I'd like to buy your company. And I thought, this is how it happens. I always wondered how this would happen. And I said, who are you? And so he gives me his card, and it turns out he was, at the time, the CEO of the 4th largest public software company in America. And I thought, Now my partner, John, was a very shy man. And so he had come to the show, but he was painfully shy. And so he was sitting behind the curtain in our booth, because he didn't want to actually see people. Or more precisely, he didn't want them to see him. And so I ran back behind the curtain. I said, John, look at this. He goes, I heard. I said, what should I do? He goes, sell the company. He said, good plan. So I ran back up. And so I said to the guy, okay, what's next? And he said, we should probably negotiate a price. I said, excellent plan. Let's do that. And so he literally, right there in the middle of the trade show floor, he said, well, we've been doing some research. We've come to a view. And we think, we should pay you this. And he actually had a piece of paper with a number on it. And it was my kind of number. There were ones, there were zeros, there were commas. It went on for a really long fucking time. It was like, great. And I said, cool, don't go anywhere. And I ran back. I said, John, what do you think? He says, that's a big number. I divided by 3. He goes, wait, let me figure that out. He goes, yes. I said, okay. I said, I ran back up and he goes, what's going on behind the booth? I said, nothing. I didn't want to tell him I have an autistic partner. So I said, yes. I just want you to know, I have since then improved my negotiating skills. Yeah. But at the time, that was kind of like how I negotiated. Yes, big number, I love you. So we said yes, and it all happened really quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, the lawyers did what lawyers do, and we sold our company. There were 2 conditions on the sale. The first condition was that we were a company based in West Hollywood, California. And the company that purchased us was headquartered in Dallas, Texas. So one of the conditions on the sale was that I, as the CEO, had to move myself and my then young family from LA to Texas. I can tell this is not an American audience. If I said that in the United States, there would have been a sound. It is not just 2,000 miles, but it's 200 years back in time. So, I mean, honestly, is there anyone here from Texas? All right, just to be perfectly candid, I hate Texas, mostly because it's full of Texans. And I say that with a great deal of pride. Anyway, so the second condition, actually, while I'm completely varying from my subject, just to really make sure you understand, I had to come home after we did the deal to tell my wife that I'd sold the company. She'd always known we were going to, like, hopefully sell the company and assumed we'd end up in a place like Boston, or the Valley, or Redmond, Washington. You know, so I said, sweetheart, I've got good news and more news. I've sold the company and we're moving to Roanoke. As it happens, my wife's European and her entire knowledge of Texas was what she'd seen on a TV show, and she thought it looked pretty quaint. And so she calls up, this is a very LA story, I'm afraid. She calls up her best friend in LA, a woman by the name of Gigi, and says, so Gigi, Doug sold his company, we have to move to Texas, and Gigi, without even breathing, said, so are you going to divorce him or go? So they were perfectly evenly weighted alternatives from an LA point of view. Anyways, the second, it had nothing to do with anything, and the second condition on the sale was that instead of us giving our company to the large corporation, them giving us very, very, very large pots of cash, instead, we gave our company to the large company, and they gave us shares in their company, and we held on to them for 100 days, which is the minimum lockup period as defined by the SEC, and then we were allowed to then sell them into the public market to take our cash. It was a very popular form of transaction at the time, because then the acquiring company didn't have to use cash. It was basically like a secondary offering. The public was essentially underwriting the cost of the purchase. I moved my company, I moved myself and my family to Texas. You can imagine my disappointment on day 89 at 8 a.m. Central Time when I woke up and the share price of the company that had purchased me fell by 99%. And that was wiped out. By the way, if you were wondering when we get to my mistake in the story, we're here. Right? You know, and if you take nothing else away from today, you can learn one thing. Take cash. Right? It's not like a complicated lesson. So I did what any adult would do. I sold. I stayed at home. It's kind of like a 12-step process, right? First you're angry, and then you want to hurt someone. And then you have to apologize to everyone. I never got there. Yeah. So I sold for about 3 days. I was in a pretty tremendously bad mood. Now, it wasn't that I was so much that I was broke. I mean, I was broke. And we'd also done some really stupid things, like I'd gone out and bought the biggest damn house you ever saw, and it came with the most enormous mortgage. Yeah, anyways, so I wasn't just broke, I was in debt, just to really put a fine point on it. And I found each day as I progressed, instead of coming to grips with this, I was simply getting angrier. And so as I was arcing up on this fantastic anger path. And so I'm not, this is by the way, one of the reasons nobody ever asks me to be an inspirational speaker, is I then decided I was going to let revenge be my guide. And I'm not advocating that the rest of you should be driven by revenge, I'm just saying it worked for me. And so I went to New York City a couple of weeks after the disaster, and I met with the large institutional investors that had lost far more money than I had lost, as you can imagine. And if I was in a bad mood, they were in some other place entirely. And I remember vividly meeting with this one particular long hedge fund manager, and she said, so we talked about it, they all were happy to meet with me. And so what are you guys going to do about this? And she said, you don't understand, we're investors. We don't do anything. By the way, a true life lesson, I might add. Never forget it. Next time you meet an investor, just remember what they do. And so she said, the real question here is, you're the one stuck in Texas. And then she laughed about that. And then when I said, what are you going to do? And it was at that moment I thought, well, that's a very good question. Now I was at the time, still quite young, and I had this sort of strategic approach to life, which could be encapsulated as ready, fire, aim. Right? Not the most, that's not the proper order, it turns out. And so I got it into my head that I would run this large U.S. public company. And so I then mounted a hostile takeover with the backing of the dissatisfied funds and took over the fourth largest U.S. public software company in America. I installed myself as president and CEO. You may say, what experience did I have to qualify myself for the job? I think, well, I run a company of 42 people and we have a product. They had 9,000 people and 250 products. I felt just scale. We had our major office, meaning our office, in Hollywood with it, one guy in London, that was our other office. They had subsidiaries in 17 countries. And I accomplished it. I became the CEO of this company. And my first act as CEO, which by the way, is the second largest mistake I ever made, is I gathered up all of the executives globally of this company. There were about 18. And I brought them all to Texas. And I put them in a room. And I fired this sons of bitches. And I gotta tell you, 15 years later, it still puts a smile on my face. As it turns out, that was a profoundly dumb thing to do. They ran the business. I had no clue what I was doing. Now I not only knew what I was doing, I had no one to tell me. Good plan, Doug. See, I even start to sound Texan when I say this shit. Good plan, Doug. I get dumber as I tell the story, thus I sound more Texan. Anyway, the short version of the story is that I then bought a plane ticket, a round-the-world plane ticket, and I visited every one of these 17 subsidiaries. Turns out I was the first person, such a classic American company. I was the first CEO in history to ever visit every office of this company. Many of them had never seen the CEO before. And of course, they were quite traumatized because their boss had gone off on a trip and had never come back. And so I found myself in this very peculiar position of literally flying into an office, gathering up these little executive teams, and picking a new CEO. Because I was everything. I forget the exact term. If you run a Japanese company, it's a KK is the term, but I was the Sheshire of the Japanese GmbH by way of example. When you get rid of everybody, you're everything. So I had like 19 titles for a very short period of my life. It was quite terrifying. And I was trying to get rid of these titles as fast as I could. And I had no plan of how I was going to choose who to be the next leader, because I had no idea about anything, or anybody, or people. And I'm not actually a very intuitive person either, so I'm not very good at picking people just to make things more entertaining. And so what I did is, if I'm brutally honest, I largely picked people at random. If they looked me in the eye, I picked them. This proves very difficult in Japan when nobody looks you in the eye. And so I did something that, at the time, I thought made straightforward sense. Turns out to have been one of the most radical things in history. I chose a young Korean woman to run our Japanese subsidiary. This would be in 1996, just to put a fine point on that. If you have no idea why that's significant, let me tell you. First of all, there were no women running Japanese public companies. Second, there were certainly no South Korean women running them in Japan. I wish I could take credit for being a social pusher of boundaries, but I was just damn ignorant. She looked me in the eye. I figured, what the hell? And I flew out, unaware of the impact I was having. I circled the world, I finished the job. That proved to be the first good thing I did. It took me 4 years to turn around that company. And at the end of it, I ran the US company and they ran the other companies. And largely, the only thing I told these other 17 people who ran the other subsidiaries was, make money and send it to me. Once a quarter, I want a contribution. I don't really give a shit how you get there. I'm busy. Sort it out. And of course, what they heard me say was, I trust you. You can do this. Win. I didn't say that. that somebody would be as stupid as I was to fire everybody in a company and then with no experience or qualifications pick people at random to run a business. I mean, how dumb would you have to be? Exactly. And so they made sense of it the only way you can. They believe that I believe in them. Well, let me tell you what happens when you truly believe in someone and you give them the opportunity to go well beyond anything they've ever done before. If you think very little of people, they will live down to that expectation. And if you think miracles of people, they can live up to it. 17 of those 18 people created larger profits every quarter for 17 quarters and saved the company. I did. I never actually turned around the U.S. headquarters. Oh, I cut it back and I did lots of things, but I actually never turned around. They did. And 4 years, 3 months, and 2 days later, not that I was hired in Texas, I sold that company to another company for cash. That was the biggest mistake I ever made. So you might ask, why school for startups? Well, because if you actually look at the list of mistakes I've made, it's longer than one. It goes on and on and on. And I would be much more successful. I'd probably have less gray hair. I'd probably look younger. If I had not gone through making mistake after avoidable mistake that I made. The art of starting a business and growing it is quite interesting, especially if you're in software. Because in software we have no limits, there's no boundaries, there's nothing, there's no physics, we're not grounded in a physical product, there's no cost of goods. Software is anything we want it to be, the market is anything we want it to be. With the sheer penetration of the web into every corner of society, we reach as far as we want to reach. And that absence of boundaries just gives you a limitless playing field to make bigger mistakes. Your mistakes can now be amplified beyond words. You're not constrained by capital. The marginal cost of starting a new business has been decimated twice in 1 decade. This is unparalleled in human history. The average cost of capital to start a software business in 2000 was reduced by 90% by 2007 and has been reduced by 90% again by 2011. It costs nearly nothing to start a company right now. Doesn't mean it's free, it doesn't mean you won't need capital. But to start a business is a cheap thing indeed, which gives you what? Even more freedom to be really goddamn dumb. That's great. You wonder why I started a school for startups? Because I am tired of seeing companies fail. I'm tired of seeing them make avoidable mistakes. And if you don't believe there's avoidable mistakes that you can make, let's play a game. I'm going to paint a picture for you of a scenario that happened not long ago. And you guys are going to tell me the answer to the question, okay? We're going to play a game. So, I was helping out 2 young guys who had started a business. And they had attended something called Seed Camp, which many of you I'm sure have heard. And before Seed Camp, we had a little strategy session. And we discussed what was going to happen and what